For having me tonight. My name is Tardiff. I'm the current chair of your Concord Conservation Commission. So welcome to our new city councilors. So I've met some of you already, but not all. And during this period of transition, we also want to give a special thanks out to Councillor Todd, who has served with us for the past, I think, 3+ years, and we're welcoming Councillor Brown on as our new council representative. We are here tonight because the Conservation Commission is celebrating its 50th anniversary. So when we realized that, we thought that warranted a look back for ourselves and all of you and for the community for what the commission has done over that time. So we did prepare a special report that is linked in your January meeting minutes, and I would encourage you to all take a look at that. But in the meantime, we wanted to highlight a few things for you tonight. So if you look at your second slide, in 1971, this city council created the Conservation Commission. We are charged with protecting, promoting, and developing the city's natural resources and also protecting the watershed resources of the city. So there's a lot that falls under that umbrella. There's a few items there. But I think one of the things that is worth mentioning is that our very first open space plan, which was adopted in 1978, was aptly named A Legacy for Future Generations. And certainly because every decision we make as a community to protect open spaces and natural resources provides benefits for both current and future residents. And so that's something that we think actively about in our decision-making process. We gave a little bit of history for you there in the third slide. The first conservation acquisitions in the city were on both sides of the river. On the east side of the river in the Oak Hill area, which continues to be a very popular area for hiking. That was identified initially as a recreation area, and it really continues to serve that purpose today. If you move a little south then, there were a couple of acquisitions in Turtletown or the Turtle Pond area, and then further south in the Broken Ground area. And again, those areas continue to be conservation focus areas for us because of the resources there. On the west side of the river, the very first conservation acquisitions are where Broad Cove Forest and Lettinen Park are located. And building from that base, one of the things the Conservation Commission has strived to do over time is to conserve additional lands where lands have already been conserved. We know that creating these large, unfragmented blocks of conservation land, that connectivity really helps to give added protection to the natural resources, and also contributes to the resiliency of those natural resources. And resiliency is something I think the commission has always thought about in our work, but I know this city council is dealing with climate change as you think about kind of the city's goals in the future. And so resiliency is something that's really kind of built into what we do in terms of our natural resources. On slide 4, which is kind of watershed and water resources protection, that of course is one of the things the commission is charged to protect. Those efforts over the years have included conservation of lands along our rivers, tributaries, and certainly wetlands, which all contribute to the health of our water resources in the city. The photograph on the left, which I realize is a little small in your reprint, but that's a vernal pool on what we know as the Haller property, which is located adjacent to the lands preserved along Pennacook Lake. That acquisition, which occurred in 2017, is an excellent example of both protection of that watershed for Pennacook Lake. It's also a really good example of how the commission really looks to take advantage of grants that are out there to help us protect our natural resources. So in this particular case, the city received grant funds from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Aquatic Resources Mitigation Grant Funds, known as the ARM grants, and also local source water protection program grants. And so we were able to kind of leverage money from the conservation funds to access those grants and obtain those for conservation. So that's something that we look to do in a lot of our conservation efforts to really kind of extend our conservation dollars for the maximum benefit. If we move then to the broken ground slide, I mentioned broken ground earlier as one of the very first conservation areas. That's another area where we have looked to kind of expand that. It has long been a conservation focus area for us. And I flagged that because the broken ground acquisition back in 2013, I think it was, this city council authorized the use of a bond it had approved in 2002 to acquire 270 acres out in broken ground and kind of continue that, that conservation area out there. That was certainly an acquisition, when I think back, that just had resounding public support for both the use of that bond and the conservation of that land, you know, particularly among residents on the east side. So there are a lot of residential neighborhoods that have access to that land, can walk to that land. It was fairly popular land for use. So when it was threatened with development, we really heard from a lot of people in this community about the importance of preserving that. So there is a trail network laid out on that that's heavily used. It's a wonderful trail network. I also flagged it because it is the first time that we have partnered with the New Hampshire chapter of the New England Mountain Bike Association and developed a trail out there that was designed for mountain bike use. And when we think about kind of multiple use of these conservation lands in a manner that doesn't conflict with the natural resources, there's certainly a demand for use beyond hiking. So that mountain bike trail was our first kind of effort in that regard. On slide 6, I wanted to highlight agricultural lands. That's another kind of component of what the commission has looked to been active in preserving over the last 50 years. It, of course, has a long history of agriculture in this community. I think we've heard from a number of sources, there's been talk over the years that we may be the only state capital that has active agricultural fields within sight of the state capitol, which is really something unique. In my working life, I've actually spent a lot of time out in Iowa, which is covered with corn and soybean fields. There are no corn or soybean fields within the site of the state capitol, so that is really something special. We know that suitable or sustainable local agriculture in our community requires land, and not just any land, but land that has those prime agricultural soils or soils of state significance. And certainly the cost of land is kind of a burden for farmers. There's a lot of pressure on development of those lands. So in terms of the efforts of the commission with the work of City Council over the last 50 years, there's been preservation of lands along the river, which is really kind of vital prime ag soils in this city. But we also have, you know, what I like to think of as a necklace of farms along the west side where conservation easements have been placed. So those working local farms remain part of our community. If we move on to slide 7, the trail system. So, you know, we conserve our land and natural resources to protect those natural resources, but there are benefits for us as a community that extend beyond that. And I think our trail system is certainly the highlight of that. The first trails in this city started with the very first acquisitions out in the Oak Hill area and Broken Ground, and have continued to grow from there. And so today we have over 80 miles of public trails on our conservation lands, which is just a tremendous resource for all of us. I think in the last few years with the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a tremendous increase in the use of those trails. Residents of our city, many discovering those trails for the very first time. So that's certainly, it's a wonderful resource. It's a bit of an added strain on those lands, but I think one that we are managing. We now have Ranger Mel, who is working with city staff to kind of help monitor those trails and then make sure that our continued use of those trails by the public is kind of consistent with our conservation values. But the city planning board recently adopted the city trails plan, which kind of took a step back and looked at trails throughout the city, and that'll become a good planning document for us in the future as we look to grow that trail system. Maybe there's some areas where we have to contract a little bit, where we've got conflicts with natural resources value, but that's something we're certainly committed to, and we have a very dedicated group of trail volunteers who work to keep that system going. So the next slide, I had to include in there because I think many of you worked with Marjorie Swope over the years. It's a good example of the Marjorie Swope Park was created when her husband donated 70-plus acres of land to the city for a park in her name. Marge was definitely a visionary in this area, very committed to conservation efforts in the city, and really had the tenacity to make sure that that vision was implemented with the goals of the public in mind. So the Swope Park is just a great example of kind of the partnership of people coming together. So we had a donation of land. We worked with Five Rivers Conservation Trust and St. Paul School, which has been a partner for us on a lot of projects over the years to make that area accessible. And that's really one of our most popular trails here on the west side of town. There's a slide in there on Ron Klamarczyk I won't spend a lot of time with. He's our consultant forester, but really an integral part of a lot of what he did. I would say any of you who have an opportunity to take a walk in the woods someday with Ron should do that. It's an education. He probably knows the conservation lands and open space in the city maybe better than anybody, and just has a wealth of knowledge, but he's put in a lot of hard work there. Our special report and one slide here include a listing of the previous Conservation Commission members. We think it's fairly complete. A lot of research went in. And I guess the one thing I wanted to highlight for you in that regard is that what struck me is the number of people who have spent not just a few years on the Conservation Commission, but in many cases, decades. So we have people like Terry Frost, who's pictured here, and Wynne Robinson, who for me go hand in hand because they seem to always be working together on projects, but they served for 15 and 20 years respectively, or plus on the commission. Kit Morgan, who was our last chair, that was chair when I started, was on the commission for over 25 years. So there's really kind of a great commitment by the people of the city to the work, and the folks who have put in time, like I said, decades is just remarkable. There's a list there of our current folks as of the time we prepared the special report. Again, we have grown and have a dedicated trails subcommittee now, and they are supplemented by trail stewards. So we have a trail steward on each of the trails through the city, and they're responsible for walking those trails periodically and reporting back if there are problems. And we also have a tree subcommittee that was reconstituted in recent years. So that's about all I have. I think I wanted to close by saying, thank you. The City Council is, of course, an important partner with the Commission in every decision we make or every recommendation we make to you to conserve conservation land. We are looking forward to the next 50 years of kind of productive work together, and looking to kind of achieve the goals and purposes for which the Commission was created. So I'm happy to take any questions, but thank you, and I hope you'll join us in celebrating 50 very productive years in the area of conservation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time. Does anybody have any questions for the chair?
All right.
I just want to say thank you for your volunteer effort, and to all the members of the commission. We take your advice and guidance very seriously, and so thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.